One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Today we're doing Lanaeral the Elf Archer. We're going to basically paint him like Legolas. And then a week from today, we're going to do Friar Stone, another lovely Reaper miniature. For today, like I said, we're basically going to paint Legolas. So it's going to be green cloak. The leaf green and pale green is the cloak and highlights. Rosy shadow, rosy highlights is going to be our very pale skin tone. Chestnut gold, palomino gold, buckskin pale. That's going to be our blonde hair. And that's sort of... that's the overall plan for the paints for today. So now let's get this thing rolling. As always, if you have any questions as the class is going on, don't hesitate to drop them in the chat, either on the Discord or on Twitch. And if I don't notice your question, just drop a couple and I'll hear it, and then I'll come back and answer your questions as we go. I'll do my best to paint slowly, but if I start to do things, you don't see what I did, just tell me right away. Didn't see it, I'm painting too fast, whatever it is, I'll slow down. And if you do have a question, really don't hesitate. This is more fun for me when it's a conversation. You ask questions as we go. So that's the way I would like it to be. Okay, so the plan for the project, as I said, we're beginning painting Lanaeral the Elf here. And we'll get our focus perfected. Actually not too bad today, and we'll see how we can just going to adjust it very slightly to make sure that it is good to go. And that is one of the irritating things about this. The focus is going to change constantly. Don't hesitate to tell me if it's out of focus and you can't see what I'm doing. There's no point if it's not crystal clear. Okay, there we go. And now we got our palette camera live. Lovely. There we go. Everything ready to rock. So there's Lanaeral. I've done a little bit of modification to the mini. I added them onto this base, and I added a bowstring. But bows always look better with a bowstring, and the earlier you learn to do that skill, the happier you'll be. This one I did just by, I put a little tiny groove in the top of the bow there, and in the top of the bow there, and made sure there was room for it to go through under his arm. And then this is a piece of fine nylon fishing line. And before gluing it in place, I just glued it in with a little bit of super glue at each end. I sanded it. I just gave it a little bit of a sand to the fishing line so that the paint and glue will stick. Then you glue one end first, let it dry, and have the other end loose. And then when you're ready, put the last little drop of glue on there, and then pull the line until it's tight. Let it set, and then when you let go of it, the bowstring will be perfect. And then cut off the excess with a hobby knife, just to kind of perfect the thing. And actually, once the super glue is dry, you can sand it, gently sand it to make it look absolutely perfect. So that's how we get the bowstring on there. I also do them sometimes with steel music wire, and then you get a bowstring that's not going to bend. It's not going to, because this one could, like, if the bow, somebody drops that and bangs it, the bowstring is going to be all out of place. If you use a steel music wire, never going to bend. The only risk you run then is when you clip it, the bits of music wire are like little bullets. They shoot across the room. They get you in the eye. You just want to be super careful. Okay, so that is bowstrings. That's our super in focus guy. And now we are going to start building our palette. And the main thing I'm going to do this time, that I hadn't been doing much of this before, but we're going to make sure we do it today. Last week I didn't do this. We're going to try to paint the whole mini. So we're going to base coat just about everything once. And we'll work our way all around the mini. And then when we get back to the start, we'll start doing shadows and highlighting. So I'm going to start loading up my palette with my green. So that's leaf green going in the palette. And there's our pale green. This will be the highlight color for the cloak. We're going to use golden blonde to highlight the cloak. Golden blonde is a great color from Reaper because it's basically a warm white. It's got a bit of yellow in it, and it's really good. You can highlight just about any color by mixing in. You can create the highlight by mixing in pale yellow, or this gold blonde. It's a great color for that. All right, let's fix that bit of silliness. There we go. Now I'm looking at you. So that's going to be the first thing we're going to do. We're going to use Rosy Shadow. That's the wrong color. We use Rosy Shadow as our main skin tone color. And we're going to work up from there to Rosy Highlight. So it's going to be a pale, rosy skin tone. There we go. Rosy Highlight. And Creamy Ivory is going to be one of our highlight colors for the skin tone. We need blue for a little bit of the clothing. And we're going to mix solid white into that. And then we are going to do, thank you, we're going to use russet brown for boots, leather, all that kind of good stuff. And I might try a trick by mixing brown and green together to make a shadow color for the cloak, and that'll be fun. And harvest brown. And we are painting. So I've been fighting with that darn Winsor & Newton brush for weeks. I'm not going to use it today. I'm just going to start off using this lovely Da Vinci that it's well broken in. I'm quite fond of it. We might also use I use this nylon synthetic brush. What's this? Is a number 4, I think? Yeah, number 4. Oh my gosh. There we go. Nice new number 4 synthetic brush. That'll be use that for my base coating. And I think we are painting. So I'm going to start with the green. As usual, I grab a little bit of green paint, my base coat color, and I just don't paint from that. I move it off to the side, and I'll work my brush in it, roll the brush, smooth the paint out so that it's going to flow well once we get onto the figure. We don't want the brush overloaded. And we get into it from there. We just make sure I've got all the necessary things working. We do. So we're going to use this color on the whole cloak. So I'm going to start inside the cloak by his left arm. And I'm basically just going to go in one direction as I paint. I'll start up under his arm, right at the back. And then I'm going to work my way forward so that I don't repaint as I go. I don't want to tear up the partly dried paint. So we get the first little bit of paint on there, and then I'll let that dry and work my way around the rest of the mini. So I'll do the part of the cloak in between the legs. And you notice I didn't put water in the paint. I didn't thin the paint a lot. Putting on a thin layer rather than trying to paint with thinned paint. And that's my plan for the most part today, is not to fight the paint. I've got my paints well shaken up, and I'm going to just put on a thin layer of paint, work it, and that'll give me a nice smooth finish, which is what I'm aiming for. Okay, I'm onto the back of the cloak. Oh, look at that. I grabbed the wrong paint by mistake. Clean that off. Grab the flesh tone instead of the green. There we go. And we'll start painting the back of the cloak. Same thing. Start in one side, and I'm going to keep working my way across. The one thing I have noticed beginners do quite a bit in some of our beginner classes here is they'll flick the brush right past the mini as they're working. And that can, well, seeing paint splatters everywhere. It also can damage the tip of your brush. really don't need to, be hitting the miniature so hard or so aggressively that your brush is going all over the place. It's going to be gentle with the brush, and they'll last you much longer. Now, no nylon brush is going to last you that long. For me, the tip on this is already starting to curl. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. The tip is already starting to curl on this brush. That's just the nature of nylon brushes. The tips just curl up. Nothing you can do about it. The best thing you can do is learn to paint and use that curl on the tip to your advantage. Use it to reach around corners. Use it to get access into recesses on the Mini. But yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. You can repair it a little bit by boiling water and putting the brush tips into the boiling water and then pulling them straight and all that kind of thing. It's a lot of work. I almost never do it. Just get used to painting with the tips being a bit curved, and save the work that you need to do really good detail work. Save your good Kalinskis or your sable brushes for those jobs. You'll be happier in the long term. As I said, normally one of these brushes only lasts me a couple of minis. This one's already got the tip wrecked, but I'm not going to try to do very fine work with it. Okay, so I've worked all the way around the back of the cloak, and now I've done the bit of the cloak that's around the front. I'm not too worried about getting this on his little flower there on his chest, but I think most of his clothing is going to end up being either light blue or light green, so I'm not going to paint this color on it. And I don't really want to paint this over the leather. So that's good enough for this first coat. And now I'm going to go and grab, let's use the dark brown. I'm going to use the dark brown on some of the leather bits. So this is, I think, russet brown. It's part of Reaper's autumn browns or warm browns. Yeah, autumn browns triad. Same thing. Just kind of rotate the tip of the brush in the paint. And now I'm going to do the bracers, kind of the bags and that strap over his shoulder, sword scabbard, the boots are all going to be this color. And why am I doing that before I do the rest of his clothing? It's because in my mind, I really haven't decided yet what color I actually want that clothing to be. And I'm wondering if maybe once I see what the leather looks like, I'll make a decision. Now, I have already decided what my light direction is. I should have started that from the start. I told you from the start. You can see like this foot is brightly lit, whereas the back from this side is quite shadowed. So my light direction is coming like the enemy he's about to shoot is looking at him from within the light. So he's looking almost directly towards the light source. So I'll put that little arrow on the base as usual. There's my arrow to remind me the light is coming that way. And keep going on these boots. So I think this guy's going to be more like Legolas in The Hobbit than Legolas in Lord of the Rings. So he's going to be a little bit younger looking, a little bit darker colors overall, rather than that very stylized, very light colored clothing that he has in Lord of the Rings. I don't know if talking about those movies will get me in trouble with all the intellectual property police, but hopefully not. I'm not duplicating the color scheme. I'm just, let's say, inspired by it. That's my plan. All right. Bracers, same color. Nice and simple. paint this on the quiver for his arrows as well. I think we're missing a dark color. I think I need to add like a darker blue or something in there as well. Oops, am I drifting? Sorry, did I talk over you? Was there a question there?
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be first. Be the first to ask a question. I'd say win a prize, but there's no prizes for asking questions. And I'm serious when I say this is meant to be a bit of a conversation. If you do want to ask me anything or chat, you're more than welcome to. Just bear in mind that it's all being recorded. Just to keep it age appropriate. All right. Look at that leather strap comes under his hairline. Oops. So I'm going to paint that brown as well. Not too worried about getting this brown on his hair, because his hair is going to be a dirty blonde color. So we're pretty much going to paint over. That's interesting. The strap is actually really hard to see. It's just right in there. I'm not going to be able to do this on the camera, unfortunately. There. Right in that little crevice in there. Very hard to see, very hard to reach. It's not that hard to reach. It's just hard to show on the camera and reach it at the same time. There we go. Sword scabbard. Get the whole belt. We missed anything. Belt pouch. Bracers. All the arrows. Get this nice brown coat. Oh, I missed the back of his boots. Let's paint the back of his boots this color now. Yeah, that's better. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to... I feel like I do need to add a darker blue to the palette. So I'm going to grab Reaper Twilight Blue. Just a dark blue-gray. I'm going to add that onto the palette. I'm going to use that as a base color for blue, for a blue like jacket that he's wearing. So that main blue, you can see the sleeves of it here by his right arm, and you can see the bottom of it sticks out under his belt in front of the cloak, so right in there. And we're going to do his leggings that lighter blue color. So they're both going to be highlighted in a similar way, but this jacket will have a slightly different looking color underneath. It'll look darker overall because we're starting with a darker color. There. I like that. It shows up just a little bit by that arm. It goes above the belt and below the cloak in his armpit. There we go. A little bit over the top of the arm, close to the bow. And a little bit more back there. There we go. Now I think we're on the right track. Okay, I like that. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, because I want those pants to be, and his shirt to be light blue, I'm going to take some of the snow shadow and move it off to the side. I'm going to drop just a tiny drop of that twilight blue in it, make just a slightly darker blue color. There, that's what I'm looking for. Just slightly darker. And that's what I'm going to paint his shirt and his leggings are going to be this color. Now, if your base coats aren't coming out perfect, don't worry about that. You have lots of time to clean up later on. Lots of time to clean up as we go. Now, I'm going to do a bit of his sleeve right there by the bowstring. Pretty good. Are you coming back, dude? Okay. Have I been on mute all this time? Please tell me I haven't. Oh well. It's the way cookie crumbles, I guess. You can sure hear me now. Okay. Yep. Lovely and muted all that time. Oh well. So because I was muted, I'll just explain a little bit what I did. I mixed in some red violet into the skin tone just to darken it and make it quite a bit redder. So that's the rosy skin shadow. And that's just so that when I do the highlighting with the very pale skin tone that I'm going to end up with, it looks a bit less cold and stark. This red is going to show through those layers, and it'll help make him look a little bit look more alive. That's what I'm looking for to say. It'll help make him look more alive. Okay, and I'm realizing as well that I missed his, so that's the base skin tone, but I've missed his pants. So I'm going to go down and grab that same color I used on his shirt and on his sleeves, and I'm going to paint this on his leggings. So it's the lighter of the two kind of mixes of blue we've got on the palette. Thought I was in a better position, but I guess I'm not. Okay, there we go. Do that on both legs. Okay. Pretty happy with how that looks so far. We just got a last kind of first color we need to put on there is going to be for the hair. And somehow I just realized I don't have the hair colors in the palette. So let's add those now. I'm using the Reaper's, can't remember what this, warm yellow, try it or something it's called. I can't remember. Chestnut gold, palomino gold, and buckskin pale. It's kind of a nice little triad. I like using it for, use it for all kinds of different stuff. Painting hay, painting lion fur. But it makes a nice pale blonde hair color as well. So that is the planification. It used to be a preferred triad for doing non-metallic metal gold as well, but the actual Reaper NMM gold triad is, I really like it. I use it all the time for doing NMM gold, and it really gives a nice result. Particularly like that color. Okay, so what we're going to do is grab the darkest of those three, which is the chestnut gold, and exactly what we've just been doing. I'm going to paint that onto the put a base coat on the hair. Of course, I grabbed the wrong brush, so we'll start again. There we go. Got our brush all loaded up. This might take a couple of coats. It's quite a thin paint, but we'll see. And away we go. So where we already painted his ear, that first skin color, we're going to leave. Try not to paint over his ear if you can. We're going to paint right up alongside his face. And at this stage where we have not done much work on his skin tone yet, I wouldn't be too worried if you make a bit of a mistake and get some of this color on his face. Wow, why is it so suddenly dark here? Might feel a little bit better like that. Okay. Yeah, it's coming up on almost 4 o'clock locally, so it's, yeah, starting to get dark pretty fast. I guess I was using the natural light coming through the window to help me see, but it's getting dark. It's December. The shortest days of the year are coming. The days when we should all just stay inside and paint minis all day, every day. I'd say it's my favorite time of year, but I paint minis all day, every day, which makes every day my favorite time of year. Yep, I really need my daughter to be hanging out here. She would have said something like, "Oh, Jesus, Dad, come on, man. Smarten up." She doesn't put up with my silly dad jokes very much. Which probably means she likes my silly dad jokes. You know. Okay. Here we go. So one of the challenges in this particular paint job is going to be getting deep shadow. It's overall quite a light colored palette, and to make it look kind of bright, we are going to be painting lots of lighter highlights, but just having highlights is not enough. You've got to have shadow as well. So we're going to do some base coats, do some highlights, and then I'm going to go back and reinforce all the shadows again at the end. And we're going to use one of my favorite techniques. We're going to use black lining to separate all the shapes and define them, make a nice strong shadow. But we're also going to try doing some mixing shades. And traditionally, mixing shades means adding black into your base color to make a shade, and then you manually paint in your shadows, you blend in your shadows with that color. I think we're going to use maybe this blue or a darker blue to do that, but we'll get to that at the end. So now, most of our, missed one little spot there with a base coat. Let's fix that on the hair. There we go. Pretty happy with that. So now the next thing we're going to do, because now our green base coat is dry, we're going to go back and start doing some highlighting. So I'm going to take the leaf green, and I'm going to mix the pale green into the leaf green half and half. So it's half leaf green, half pale green. And what this is going to do is give us a lighter highlight as well as a slightly warmer looking highlight, because there's quite a bit of yellow in that leaf green. So we're increasing the value, we're increasing the tint closer towards yellow, and we're adding yellow to make it warm. And all those three things are going to help build nice contrast, make these highlights stand out quite nicely. So now I'm going to do this, and I'm aiming, really, I'm not too concerned about precise highlights yet, but the areas which are closer towards the light are going to get this first highlight. So as I look at this shoulder, this area is closer to my light source, so my brush strokes are pulling paint towards the crest of the shoulder, like that. Okay, and that's going to make it give us a nice bright highlight on the top of the shoulder. Then what I do is I turn the mini the other way, and I bring the brush strokes from the opposite direction. So let's say we'll start lower down here. Remember, that's our light direction. See, there's our light arrow. The light's coming at him this way. So we'll start there on the cloak, and again, my brush strokes are going to be pulling towards the raised part of his shoulder. So these highlights overlap in the middle. So now I've got basically like 2 or 3 layers of the highlight color at the crest closest towards the light source, and it's going to be darker further away, and that's going to help give us that nice bright look that I really like. And actually, I'm just going to say hello and shout out to Metal Chaos. If you haven't checked out Metal Chaos's stuff on Facebook or on the Reaper Facebook pages or on the Reaper forums, you should. Their painting is outstanding, very, very bright, lovely, strong, light highlights. I really like it. All right. So I'm doing the same thing on this section of the cloak. My brush strokes are all pulling towards the light direction, and that's going to help those highlights really stand out. Now, on this opposite shoulder here, away from the light, we do the same thing. We're pulling from the back of the shoulder towards the front, but I'm really being careful now not to put too much of this color in the shadow. Okay, and then down here on the cloak, his body is going to cast a shadow close inside there. Okay, because we're pretty much directly opposite the direction of the light now. But this part of his cloak out here might catch just a little bit of light. So we're just going to put a little bit of raised highlight out on that tip of the cloak. And later we might come back in and put a much, much darker shadow where his body is casting a shadow across that part of the cloak. There we go. So there's our first highlight on the cloak. We covered most of that with this color. And now I'm going to be looking at the hood. So I'm switching around to the back of the model. And what I want to do is exactly the same thing I just did. Making sure that my brush strokes are overlapping at the top. So I'll start on the hood and my brush strokes pull upwards. I'm not going to paint everything. See, there's a little bit of a low space in the hood there. I'm not going to paint that this color. I'm going to leave that first color so it looks a bit more shadowed. I think the inside of his hood should be quite shadowed, so I might actually put a shade, mix a darker color, and paint the inside of the hood black. The outside of the hood definitely is getting a highlight, and the highlights come up in the direction towards the top. There we go. And now we're going to do that again on the main part, but here's our light direction. So only areas that are going to get directly hit by light are the ones that kind of, as you look at the miniature from this direction. So that hood is definitely getting it. The crest of that shoulder is definitely getting it. The front of this cloak, these two highlights, these two zones of the cloak are getting direct lighting. The back on this section and this section are getting it. But behind that, there's not a lot of highlight going to go on there. So we're going to focus on those spots. And we're going to start with the brush strokes at the back. And we're bringing the brush strokes forward. Now remember, this is only our first highlight. We're going to go quite a lot lighter than this. So don't worry if you feel like you're encroaching on your shadows too much. But remember, a lot of this cloak is on the shadow side of the model. So we don't want to make it too light. So that roll right there is going to get it a touch close to the top here by the quiver. And it's actually okay if you make it too light. We can always go back and glaze a darker color in to darken it all down again. In fact, I'm going to make some deliberate mistakes for that purpose. There, I'll put some highlights on the back of the cloak that are too light, and we'll darken those down later on. There we go. And the last one to do is going to be this part of the cloak. That furthest forward fold. I don't know if you guys are noticing, but my brush is definitely suffering already. It's kind of it's pretty beat up already from just that little bit of painting. It's pretty normal for synthetic brushes. There we go. Okay, so there's our first round of highlights towards the light source. And we're going to let that dry. And we're going to do the first round of highlights on the clothing. And that's the process we're going to do. We're going to do a series of highlights, come back, do another series of highlights, and just keep working our way around. Okay, so for the next one I'm going to do, I realized that earlier I had done the leather first, but I'm going to do the pants first now. And then I'm going to do the shirt, kind of work my way up to the leather. So I'm going to grab Snow Shadow. So that was the Snow Shadow shade that we made by adding blue. Here's the straight Snow Shadow, and we're going to use this to paint the first highlights on the shirt and the pants. So exactly the same process we just did on the cloak. We're looking for where the light is going to hit directly on those. So that is going to be the top of the shirt on this sleeve, the front of this leg, and the knee on the light side of that. And it just might catch a little bit of a highlight on the raised parts back there. And I think that's probably the only place this color is going to hit, or the light is hitting directly. So this is where we want to highlight. So I start at the back and my brush strokes move forward to make sure that the color is going to be lightest towards the front. And there we go. Start a little bit further back along his knee, and exactly the same thing. Pull the brush strokes forward. We're going to overlap this color at the front several times. Nice bright highlight. So pulling from the shadow side forward on that right knee. Once again, I'm going a little bit too far back so that I'll have something to fix later. Do the same thing on the shirt. Nice, strong snow shadow highlight coming up over the top there. We'll do that one from both directions. There we go. And we're going to need to do just a bit on the raised areas on the right arm, as per the plan. Now this part of his body is mostly in shadows. That's probably as light as we're going to go on that part of the cloth. But we definitely are going to do another series of highlights on the part facing forward. We're going to let this dry though, and then we're going to do that in a minute. So now what we're going to do is grab a bit of snow shadow, move over here by our twilight blue, and make like a 50-50 mix of those two colors. And this will be the first highlight on the jacket. So where do we see the jacket? We see it here underneath the bow, and we want to do brush strokes pulling forward. And we can see that part of it there from the front just a little bit, so a nice highlight on that little fold of cloth like that. Going to work my way around, making that look lighter. And then there's a little bit of it that shows up on his chest right in there. So we'll give that a little highlight. And under his arm, shows up a bit in there too. I think there's supposed to be leather armor or something in there, but I'm not too worried about it. I'm just going to pretend that it's not there and paint it like it's part of his cloth shirt. There we go. So we've given a bit of a highlight to each of these raised folds of cloth. There we go. And maybe just a touch on that elbow. That's the wrong color. Why did I do that? Well, fix it later. And then this part here by the bowstring, same thing. We'll pull that brush stroke up towards the top. Paint the top of that part of the jacket. There we go. Now we got some nice highlights on the go. I'm liking it. Okay. Leather is next. So we've got our harvest brown there, or russet brown, or whatever it was called, russet brown. The next one was autumn brown. So what I'm going to do is just, actually the russet brown and the autumn brown work really well together. The autumn brown, what is this color called? Harvest brown is fairly transparent. So you don't really have to mix the two. You can just put one right over the other and they kind of blend really well. They layer well. So I'm going to use pretty much straight harvest brown, and I'm going to do exactly what I just did. All my brush strokes are pulling forwards so that I get a couple of layers of this at the front of the boot. Now, leather boots tend to be a little bit shiny, so I'm not really making a complete highlight. I'm just hitting the most raised areas and pulling the brush strokes in the direction of the light source. And that'll make these look a little bit patchy. Now there's other techniques for doing leather. We're keeping this really simple today. I'm just going to keep, so now I'm doing my brush strokes in the other direction. They're coming from the back behind his leg, forward, and just hitting those raised areas on the leather. And it doesn't have to be perfect and smooth, because the leather is not going to be, it'll be a little bit shiny, but it's not going to be perfect. These are the boots that he's running around kicking orcs in the face with, so they might be kind of beat up. There we go. Do the same thing. Now I'm going to reach this right around to the back of these boots as well. just because this color darkens quite a bit as it dries. So it's not going to look out of place in those shadows. But when we do the second and kind of third highlight colors, I'll keep it focused towards the front. Okay, so that's the boots. I'm going to do the same deal on the bracer on both arms. So if that's my light direction, I'm going to start about the midpoint of the bracer, okay, and pull forwards from there. And that's a good way to kind of gauge how big should my highlight be. Figure out where the border is between the light and the shadow, and then have your brush strokes pull forward from there. And that's going to increase the color saturation towards the light source. And your color tends to be most saturated in the zone between the shadow and the highlight, between the shadow and the light source. So as I start to add golden blonde or creamy ivory, one of those colors into this brown, it's going to be a desaturated brown, and it's going to look lighter but also have less color, which means that when I finish the highlights, the zone in between the highlight and the shadow will have the most color in it. And it's a good way to get a natural looking highlighting effect. Do the same thing on the bracer at the back, and I want to be careful not to get this over the white on the shirt, because that'll be kind of hard to fix. We'd have to wait for it to dry, paint blue over it. I don't want to say start again, but we'd almost have to start again on that part of the shirt. So now I'm going to do the bit under his hair on this belt. And I do really want to be careful now, because I don't want to get this on the green or on the blue. Belt pouch, same deal. Scabbard of the sword, the hilt of the sword. Same idea. Now, I am noticing that I made a mistake, and I didn't paint the inside of the scabbard in there. So I'm going to fix that now. I'm going to grab that russet brown again. I'm going to paint under the little belt buckly thing, and I'm going to paint along the side of that scabbard right in there. There we go. Now you can see. There we go. That looks a bit more comprehensive. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So now we're going to keep working our way around. We're going to rotate the mini around, and now we're looking for the other part of that belt from his chest at the back. That's quite a bit in the shadow, but with the same as we did with the other leather, this is going to get a little bit of light. So give it a little bit of a light highlight, pulling the brush forward towards our light source. And the same thing on this quiver. Even though it's mostly in the shadow, we're going to give it a highlight by moving our brush strokes forward across it. And then later we're going to go back in with darker colors and kind of sharpen the look of those patterns on the quiver. Maybe even give them some fancy little arrow fletchings or something. There we go. I'm pretty happy with the overall look of that now. I don't think I've missed anything. At least nothing is jumping out at me. So I'm pretty happy with that. Starting to look pretty good already. We got a general idea what's going on. Now, next thing is going to be highlighting the hair. Now, why am I doing the hair now instead of the skin tone? Because I think it'll be easier to fix the ears with highlights than to fix the hair. So if we make mistakes. So we're going to paint the hair now. I'm taking a mix of gold and chestnut and palomino gold. Just making it's mostly palomino gold, but I want to do kind of an initial mix, because that just makes it easier to add the layers over top, right? There's already a bit of that color underneath, and I'm adding this mostly yellow ochre color on top. Now with the light coming that direction, okay, so as we look at them, the light coming this way, the highlight is not going to be right on the top of its head. Okay, the highlight is going to be slightly closer to us as we look at him. So we're not putting a big round highlight on the top of his head. We're starting a little bit further down, almost like a little bit of a halo around his head, and people do call this the halo effect. So I'm ignoring the texture that's sculpted in his hair, and I'm pulling from the light away towards the shadow first. And then I'm going to reverse the brush direction and pull from the shadow towards the highlight so that those brush strokes overlap in the middle. Now, last time I did one of these videos, I demonstrated that a bunch of times. But I'm going to do it one more time. I'll probably do this almost every video because it's such a fundamental thing. And hopefully people find it useful. But here we go. So there's the one I did the demo on the last time. Okay, we did it right in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our happy paint. And I'm going to make it a little bit thinner so you can see more clearly what's happening. And when I do a brush stroke starting from, let's say, the left over here, okay, and I go across, wherever I lift the brush, leaves more paint. Okay, so by lining that up a bunch of times, I get a highlight. If I do the same thing coming from the other direction, I get another bright highlight. And if I line them up together and make them meet in the middle, it's about 3 times as strong. So this one I did was a slightly lighter color than I'm working with right now. But the same thing is going to work. I'll start on the outside. And work my way towards the center of this. So there's my brush strokes pulling towards the light source. And by lining up all those dots, by always having the brush strokes pulling towards the light, so this would be like the top of the shoulder or the top of his head, and then we come from the other direction, do the same thing, pulling the brush strokes in. You get that nice bright highlight in the middle. The other cool thing is that if later we come in and want to glaze with this color, when we glaze, we can put a thin coating of this paint all over top of this and then move it so that those little dots end up sitting in the same relative position in the center. And when they dry, you won't get any coffee stains. See this effect here? That brighter line, that's a coffee stain. So by painting this way, we avoid that effect. And we get nice bright highlights, which is what I like. So I'm going to keep going, working on the head there. Fix my camera position. Lots of light. Double check our focus is still good. There we go. And let's keep working on these highlights around the crown of his head. The crown effect, the halo effect. Okay, so we did all those brush strokes initially pulling downwards. We'll keep going around the rest of his head. Again, I'm ignoring the sculpted texture of the hair. I'm just painting a ring of color, and then I'm going to reverse and go the other way and pull the brush strokes upwards, just like I demonstrated, to get that nice strong ring of color. And this is based on the idea that of the direction that the light is reflecting off of his shiny hair. Okay. Now this color is going to be pretty much buried in a minute, but it will still show through, and this is giving our next layers of this color a nice foundation. And this is the same approach you take painting yellow, painting white, and those things. You've got to give it a good foundation for it to work. So now what I'm looking for is this arc right across here, where it curves outwards. It's a bit of a convex arc. Same idea. We're going to put another row of this along that outward curve. Like this. We go. So I'm going to keep working on this one, keep working my way around. So you might hear some noise in the background. It's my good friend Roger back there working on terrain. One of the things I love about this studio is people are always working on cool stuff. Okay, there we go. So there's our first highlight of yellow. And notice I didn't fill in all of the part on his head. I've left that the shadow color. And that's going to give us a nice looking contrast when we get to the higher, the lighter highlights as we go. Okay. All right. Now I'm just going to check because I can't see the Twitch comments at the moment. Let's double check if anybody's trying to chat with us. Nope. All good. Do you guys have any questions, people that are following along? Anything you want to ask about, complain about? No? Wish we were painting a dwarf instead of an elf? Never paint an elf. Old Legolas here is a troublemaker, I can tell. Okay, so we are on to skin tone. So the first skin tone we did was a mixture of rosy shadow with violet red. Now I'm just going to use straight rosy shadow to do my first highlights on the skin. And these skin tones, like the pre-made skin tones, are one of the ones that you really want to be careful about over brushing. So if you keep brushing while the paint is partly dry and it tears out little divots of paint, it looks really bad. So this is one area where you want to be particularly careful not to go back again and again and again and end up tearing the paint out. So I'm going to start on the back of this thumb on his right hand, and my paint is pulling forward. Now the bracers already have a highlight on them, so I don't want to... Working our way forward, making the highlights. So pulling forward. We want to pull the light out towards the top of the knuckles. And now I'm going to pull from the bottom of his knuckles forward. And I'm not going to completely cover over that rosy violet color I made earlier. I want to keep those shadows in between his fingers. Now I notice I didn't get the very bottoms of his fingers earlier, so I'm just going to kind of give them a little touch of this color. There we go. And now he's got this first highlight on his hand. We're going to do the same. Thank you. We're going to do the same thing on the other hand. Now the thumb is kind of pinching this little arrow. So we want to make sure we get the top of the thumb, and then the palm of his hand needs a highlight. So we're pulling forward along the palm of his hand. Nice strong highlight there. And all of these fingers, which are not that clearly differentiated in the sculpt, there's 1, 2, 3 of them there, and one comes up over the top of the arrow. We want to make sure we paint them all separately and keep a shadow in between. So then I'm going to reverse the mini this way and do the same thing, pulling that brush across the top of the mini. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4 well-defined fingers. And I'll do the same thing on the back of his hand. I'm going to work my way forward. Now, even though this color might be a little too light for the back there, no, you know what? It'll be all right because all the other highlights on the skin are going to be really, really light. This will look appropriate in the shadow once I make the other highlights really light. There we go. And now we're going to do the same thing on his face. And I'm realizing I'm about to try to paint his face with this giant brush, which is not impossible. And I'll just keep going with this brush just to show you it's not impossible. You just want to be careful, make sure that you don't have a lot of water in the brush or dried chunks of paint on the tip of the brush that are going to leave big marks and a big mess. So I'm going to just use this size 4 synthetic with the beat up tip, and I'll paint the first layers of paint on his face. Again, I am not using thin paint, but I am rolling the brush in the paint to work it to smooth it before going to paint on the dude. The dude, that's his new name, the dude. Alright, so I'm looking for the forehead. There's his forehead, and the first brush strokes are going to be basically his whole brow, pulling forward to the top above his his left eyebrow. Then I'm going to reverse and go into the same area, but pull in the opposite direction, exactly as we've done everything else, but to get the highlight to be as close as possible to the light. There we go. Now I'm going to do the same thing on his cheek. I don't want to cover over his eyes. His eyes have now got the shadow color that we want in them already. Actually, his eyes are going to need to be darker, but we'll deal with that later. I'm going to start on his cheek and pull forward up to his nose, the whole bridge of his nose, the whole side of his nose. And then I do the same thing in the opposite direction on the opposite cheek. Now remember, we said this is going to be very, very pale skin. So we're going to need to make fairly large highlights at this stage. There we go. And I'm going to keep working on that part. And I'm going to work now, start on his cheeks, make it nice high round cheekbones, and pull forward along there. I'm going to pull forward on the top of his lip. Okay. And then I'm going to do that on his chin, along the jawline and on his chin. But I'm not going to go over his lips again. We might actually come back and darken those lips. And then I'm going to do the other jawline, pulling the brush in the opposite direction, his cheek, nice round cheekbone, pulling brush the other way, top of his lip, and his chin. But again, don't cover over the lip. Now we can see facial features are starting to show up. Just realized this guy looks like Dave Mustaine. Not intentional, I'm sure. Alright, and we do the same thing. We need to paint the tips of his ears. There's one. And the lower part of his ear. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Tip of the ear. We'll leave a nice shadow in the middle. Nice shadow in the center of his ear. Right in there. Okay. There we go. So we painted that face with that giant brush. Now I can stop punishing myself. Okay. Now, what's next is going to be, the green will be ready for the next round of highlights. Let everything else dry for a while, so we're going to go straight back to our green. Now, you'll have cleaned the flesh tone off of your brush. Be careful that you don't have your brush overloaded with water when we go to do this, because the water is going to make the paint chalky. A little bit more difficult to control, and you could end up with water, like those coffee stained watermarks. So just be cautious of that. Okay. And now, so this is just straight pale green. And it's exactly the same highlights as we did earlier. We're going to do them again on the cloak. So I'm going to start with the one under his neck. But now as I'm painting them, I'm just hitting the most raised surfaces. So I am paying attention to the texture that the artist sculpted. And I'm just hitting the tops of the raised, kind of round sculpted shapes. My brushstroke direction is still pulling towards the light. There we go. And it's going to give us a nice, I love this green. It's going to give us a nice bright green highlight. The only downside of this particular green is it does get kind of chalky. So now we're doing the exact same highlights on the other side. Pulling forward, hitting the raised areas. And overlapping green highlights with the ones we just did. Nice bright green highlights. I'm going to do the hood. So just as a bit of a heads up, I'm going to take a break in the moment after we do this green highlight on this hood. So that'll be a good chance to either catch up on the painting or think of some questions you want to ask. And like I said, I'm always happy to have a conversation as we do this. Okay, so I'm going to do the other half of his hood now. Just hitting the raised texture and pulling the brush strokes forward. Be careful not to fully paint in any of the shadows. Okay, we want to keep our shadows there. That bit of cloth down between his legs is going to get a highlight as well. That's a bit of a hard one to do. So we could do a whole bunch of little brush strokes to pull the brush strokes forward, and then reverse it and then pull from the shadow. Or if you're feeling comfortable with it, you could just kind of run your brush along it to make the shadow, or to make the highlight. Either way will work in this case. Same thing on that part of the cloth in there. We're going to pull the brush strokes forward and give a nice bright highlight on that one. Now make sure these highlights are not bigger than the earlier highlights we made. You want the other colors to be visible between the highlights. Okay, so you can, I don't know if you can see, I can certainly see here that I've got the first color, the second color, and then the third color all visible. I haven't completely covered anything over. And that's important because we want to have that sense of volume that the contrast between the layers is going to create for us. And then coming into the back of the cloak, as I said, most of this is going to be in the shadow of his body, so we're really focusing out towards the tip of this kind of bit of his cloak. If you make it too light, don't worry, we can always go back and make it darker. We want to really focus towards the front. Sorry, towards the edge, which is protruding into the light. That bit is protruding into the light. Okay, so now we've got nice bright highlight. Our back should look darker. It does. And we're gonna keep those highlights there. Okay, but we're going to increase the amount of highlight down here. Sorry, down here. Bearing in mind that most of this is not getting the light directly, right? There's our view from the front. So we know that this side of this part in here needs to be highlighted. So I'm going to run the brush along it sideways, going towards my light direction. There we go. Okay. Do the same thing on the next one down. There's my highlight for that. And then this zone in here, that protrudes into the light. So I'm going sideways along that, just hitting the raised areas still. And on the top, brush strokes towards the light source. There we go. And I think I made a plan earlier to make some deliberate mistakes, so I'll do that again. There's something which is a little too bright. There's some more that's a little bit too bright. And all the way up there we'll make that too bright as well. We'll fix that later. Bring it back down again. Okay, so there's our green highlight. And I'm going to take a little bit of a break. And you think of any questions you might have, and I'll be happy to answer them just in a moment. Actually, I'll turn that over like that. And leave it visible. It's interesting, the light is looking much bluer today, whereas on the camera, whereas in person that's looking very, very lime yellow to me. Okay, so a couple of good questions there, and one of the things just was commenting on was we're going to blend later. So you don't need to worry too much about blending right now. Just keep building up the layers, and for sure on the cloak, we might not get to do everything, but for sure on the cloak, we're going to do a glazing blend of the layers at the end. So if it looks a bit rough, things don't look perfect, not to worry. We're going to practice how to modify the look of things, how to blend a little bit at the end. And this, as the paint-alongs are meant to be foundation stuff, right? So we're going to keep it simple, but we are going to try to focus on really important foundation things, which is layering. Layering is kind of the starter technique for everything advanced. You get your brush control by learning to layer. And then from there, it's all good. Okay, so we are going to do, since we had time for that to dry, we are going to keep going with our green highlighting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some of this golden blonde, which looks a bit gooey because it's been sitting on the palette for a while, And I'm going to make a mix of about 2/3 pale green, 1/3 golden blonde. And as I said earlier, the golden blonde is a wonderful color. It's one of Reaper's like magic colors that you can highlight just about anything with golden blonde because it's got so much white filler. It's yellow, it's warm, it's at the top of the color wheel. You can get away with using golden blonde in just about anything. Now the only downside is like so many paints with a lot of white filler in them, they get chalky when they dry when you thin them too much. So not the greatest color for glazing, but it's very versatile for just about everything else. It's one of like 5 Reaper paints that's always on my painting desk. Okay, I'm going to fix my focus. Something went a little bit off there. Let's just make sure that we got control of it. We do. Fix, fix, fix. Okay. So now we are going to just where we've been cleaning brushes and reloading everything, make sure your brushes are not overloaded with water so you don't end up causing the flood. The flood comes from water pushing paint out of the brush, either because it's overloaded with water or the paint is too thin. So we want to be a little bit cautious about that as we go forward. Okay, I'll keep the same sequence I was using before. I'll start on the front of the cloak. Wow, the world is dark today. Okay, and I'm going to start highlighting forward. I've switched to a smaller brush. I've switched to my Da Vinci that I've been using quite a bit. And I'm going to do a little highlight on that little bit under his chin. And then I'm going to start doing the same highlights again on the cloak. Going to work my way up, and I can see that I've got too much water in my brush already. And when these highlights dry, they are going to have water stains because the paint's too thin and there's too much water. It's too late. Paint is already on there. In this case, I'm not going to worry about it. I will fix it when I do the green glaze at the end. Go. So now I've got that highlight going forward, and I'm going to reverse the mini and come back the other way. I'll start back here. Always making sure I stay towards the edge where the light is going to hit first. And I work my way forward, increasing the lightness, what we call the value, the relative light and dark of the paint. We want the lightest spots to be closest towards the light source in this case. There we go. Nice, strong highlight on the top of that. Now I'm going to fix my brush. Keep working. There's better. Now, the ones on the opposite side, really the light is only going to catch really close to the front on those 2 little folds of cloth. So that's where we're going to focus. So my brush strokes are going right to left along those shapes, pulling towards the light. There we go. Okay. The same thing is going to happen on that one down between his legs. Small highlight. Back here at this corner of the cloak, it definitely protrudes past the light a little bit. So we're going to focus right out towards the tip of it. Just give it a little bit more of a highlight, not too much. And this is one of those spots where if it's too light, we can darken it down with our glaze close to the end. There we go. And now we're working on the ones where the light is going to hit directly. We'll start in there. There we go. And down here, we're going to do the same thing, work our way forward. All right, back in the game. Building the highlights up, working our way forward. Now again, it's important not to completely cover the previous highlight, but a lot of it does end up being covered. This is just the way it goes. But we've given it a good green foundation, so it'll look all right. Just keep the highlights focused closer towards the light. With a bit of practice, you'll have the brush control to kind of keep moving the paint forward. Now the brush strokes I'm doing right here, they're very light, very, very light touch. And that's something that'll come with practice as well. And then once you get really practice at it, you can adjust the pressure to change the size of the highlight, to change the shape of the highlight, change the amount of paint that's coming off. All that kind of thing will come with practice. I'm going to do the inside of the hood, a little bit on that part at the back of the hood where the light would catch. And keep working forward. All right, so there we go. Some pretty good highlights going on there. I do want to let that dry a little bit before going to the next highlight. So I'm going to now go back to what's next is we'll do the shirt. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm grabbing a hold of some snow shadow and my solid white that I earlier put on there. I'm going to put a little bit of solid white into the snow shadow to make the next highlight for my white, my very light blue, shall we say, shirt and pants. And actually, the snow shadow and the golden blonde are good foundations for whites. The golden blonde is a good foundation for a warm, bright white. The snow shadow is an excellent foundation for a bright, cold white. And you just add a little bit of white at a time. Build up your highlights slowly with this sort of layering. And it gives you a lovely looking bright white when you're done. So just on the top of the knee there, on the right knee and on the left knee, we're going to do a little bit more. Same approach, catching the raised areas, putting the brush forward. Highlighting the pants or leggings. You could actually, at the end, if you wanted, you could do like a freehand on those leggings. Light them up. All right, Wed, drifting off the camera as usual. Now, if you make little mistakes like I have, where you get a little bit of like a lighter color on the bracer there, okay, I'm just deliberately making some mistakes. There's a process we're going to do later that will help. It'll all disappear under the weathering we're going to do on the leather, which is a pretty simple technique, but it will help conceal some of that. There we go. And there's his other arm. Now we just need to double check if we missed any. No, that's enough for this layer. Okay. There we go. And then what we're going to do is the shirt. So for the shirt, we're going to grab, or the jacket, we're going to grab more snow shadow, add it into our twilight blue and snow shadow mix. And we're going to do the same thing, highlighting the jacket with this next mix of blue-gray. Now, certainly what's happening to me here is things are drying out. With winter, the heat turns on in the building and everything dries. So I'm having to add a touch of water at a time to keep my paint from drying out. You just want to be cognizant that when you do that, it's going to change the drying time of the paint. It's going to change the way it flows. So just want to be cautious that you don't accidentally give yourself a flood. Excuse me. Okay. So I'm going to start right here in the middle. Okay. There's a bit of this jacket that sticks out under the belt. This is going to get a highlight, and the brushstroke direction is still forwards towards the light. Catching those raised areas of the jacket. Same thing underneath. A little bit of that gray shows through there. Then this sleeve in there needs a bit of a highlight too. So I'm going to reach in past the bowstring. It doesn't matter if we put color on the bowstring because we can fix that later. We haven't even looked at the bow yet. Just want to get a little bit of a highlight on the jacket. A little bit under there. Okay. And then this sleeve that protrudes needs a little bit of a highlight on the edge. Really not much because this is mostly in the shadow. Just a touch of it. And we are going to separate those by coming back and doing some dark lining, assuming I don't run out of time. And then we're going to do the rest of the jacket now. So we'll start down at the, we'll start at the sleeve at the top. Back of the sleeve at the top. This is just going to get a little highlight on the most raised area, because that's where the light will hit most. Most of the rest of that below that is in shadow. Okay, let's get the front of that. Okay. And now we're going to do the rest of the jacket down below. So I'm going to be looking into that. Well, that's an interesting spot right in there where the sleeve hangs down. That edge of the sleeve hanging down into the light, that needs a highlight too. Inside the sleeve. Inside the sleeve. Not on the outside, on the inside where the light's coming in. Okay, got that one. Now, down along the back of his leg, that little bit of the cloth that shows gets a highlight. That. And then by the belt pouch, that little roll of cloth gets a highlight. That. And so we're doing a highlight on the front of each of these little rolls of cloth. I need to add a little bit more water, maybe a little bit more paint. Paint is drying out pretty quick. That's more like what I wanted. Okay, keep working our way forward on those same highlights. And then a bit of the jacket in there, under by his sword scabbard. And then this side of his leg here behind the sword scabbard, just a tiny one on the most raised parts of that cloth that protrudes past the scabbard. So this one back here does not get it, but these ones that are further forward and protrude further, they definitely do. So there we go. Now we got his jacket showing. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. Now we're going back to doing the hair. Actually, I think we will do the eyes first, because those eyes are really nice, but they're actually difficult to reach into. So let's grab Dragon Black. I'm going to put a little bit of Dragon Black on my palette. And what we're going to do, I'm going to grab that paint I made earlier. This is the... Ooh, what brush have I... I don't know what brush I grabbed. Definitely grabbed the wrong brush. So that pinkish skin tone that I made with the rosy skin shadow, I'm grabbing that. I'm bringing a little bit over here by my black. I'm going to put a tiny bit of black in that. Okay. And I put a little bit more black in that until I've got a dark color that's not so dark that it's like pitch black, but it's quite dark. And this is going to be his iris color, okay? Because what we're going to do is we're going to fill the eye socket now with this black color, and then we're going to paint the whites of his eyes afterwards. So we're going to use our two-step eye to paint his eyes and keep it super simple. But we're quite likely to make a mistake and hit the bridge of his nose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the miniature up to the brush, rotate the brush until it's lined up, sorry, right there at the miniature till it's lined up, so I can just make a little dot of paint like that to do his eyes. Let's make sure everything's visible when I do it. There we go. I'm just going to lay that brush tip into the eye socket. So I'm not trying to paint like a perfect eyeball or perfect iris. I'm painting the whole eye socket this color. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to paint just the sclera, the whites of his eyes afterwards. Now I need to do the other eye. And if you are not comfortable with painting eyes, you don't have to do this. This is, we'll call this the optional module of the paint along. There we go. So now I've got those two dark shapes painted in his eyes. And when I go back and paint the whites of the eyes, okay, that is going to look like an iris. Very, very simple eye, easy to paint. Okay, and I'm just going to, while I'm doing this, you don't need to do this, but I'm going to darken his lip color just a little bit. I shouldn't be doing this because that's not, I'm not painting just for fun. There we go. All right, so his eyes are ready to go for the whites to be painted. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that mix that we had earlier of snow shadow with solid white. It was the color we used most recently to highlight his pants. This is going to be the color for the whites of his eyes. Now, if you're fond of Flow Improver, this would be a good job for Flow Improver. You get a tiny, tiny little drop of Flow Improver. Well, put a dot in your palette, but add just a little bit of it into your mix, and that'll slow down the drying time. And painting the sclera is one of those things where you really need the brush to be lined up and everything perfect, so it can take a bit longer to get set. So you prepare your paint by putting a bit of a retarder in it. It slows down the drying time, and that can make it easier, give you more working time. Now, if you add too much, you end up flooding the eye socket as though you were painting with, really thin paint with water in it. You really just need just a little bit of this. So now what I'm going to do, let me get lined up so we can see, is I'm only going to paint the left side of the eye from my perspective. I'm going to just put like one little arc of white in there, or this off-white color. Oh, look at that. I made a mess. Who would have thought that would happen? Happens to me all the time. So I made a mistake. What do? I'm going to grab my paintbrush. Oh, there's the one I was looking for, my little Rosemary & Co. that I love so much. So how do I fix my mistake? There's that mess I made. I go back to the color I was just playing with, and I reapply it, cover it over, and try again. No big deal. And away we go. Line the brush up. Repaint the eye socket. There we go. We're gonna let it dry, and then I go paint the whites again. Now, if you struggle with painting eyes, I do have a tutorial that I call "Painting Eyes is Secretly Easy." It's on Reaper's channel. It's also linked on my website, hecatina.ca. But that's a good one for gaining confidence with painting eyes and getting control of the process you use to paint your eyes. So here we go. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to go reach back in, and I'm going to fix the sclera that I messed up before. There we go. That's a bit better. So there's one little white dot of paint. Now he looks like he's looking in the right direction. I'm going to do the other eye exactly the same way. Let me see if I can get it oriented. There we go. Just a little tiny white dot. So now he looks like he's looking off to his right for the next thing he's going to shoot. Okay, very, very simple eye. It's called the two-step eye. Works really good. And that's enough for that. So now I can comfortably go in and start highlighting the face and not worry about having, and the hair, without worrying that I'm going to hit either of those when I go back and start trying to do the eyes. So I'm going to grab rosy skin shadow. If you have rosy skin, you can just start using that, but I'm going to start mixing rosy highlight into the rosy shadow, and this skin color is going to get pale very, very quickly. There we go. That's mostly rosy skin highlight. So I'll start on the hand, same as I did earlier. I'll start on that thumb down there. Where are we? There we are. And brush stroke still going forward, smaller highlights. Again, this is another one that doesn't matter if you get it on the cuff of the bracers too much. All it will do is, by the time you're done painting the bracers, it's going to add a bit of interesting variety into the leather. So leather is one of those things that has a lot of natural organic shapes and patterns. It gets easily scratched and damaged. So you can really just mess around with it, add textures, add dots and daubs and dashes, and at the end you can glaze your leather color back over it, and all of that visual interest that you created is going to show up subtly through that repair kind of glazed over coat of paint. So there we go. We did the fingers again exactly the same way. Painted from the top first, and then from the bottom pulling upwards, keeping the shadows. So at the back of the hand, it's okay if you overlap a little bit, so that it doesn't look like the fingers go all the way up under the bracer, but definitely down below, don't connect them. Okay? And now we're going to go do the same thing on the other hand. We want to look for the thumb. There's a thumb right there. So we do that little bit of the thumb, palm of the hand. And then we're going to do those fingers. We want to make sure those three fingers get nice and separate now. So where are they? They're back there. So we're going to get some of this paint out of my way. In there. There we go. So we want those fingers to look distinct. And the tip of that finger. Same thing on the back of that hand. Keep those fingers nice and separate. Can you see that? There. Now I should be doing these brush strokes the opposite direction, but I'm doing them like this so that you can see them. Okay, there we go. And I can do that on the back of the hand, but just a little bit because that side of the hand is in the shadows. Just really at the top of the knuckles. It's kind of funny. My Rosemary & Co. is now the brush that's not cooperating very well. Look at that. It's all messy. Dried paint on it. Typical. Geoff doesn't clean his brushes well enough. Okay. Actually, I might be doing that because I did leave the conditioner in them last night. I may not have cleaned it out well enough just now. Okay. So, I'm going to keep going with this same color. And now we're going to do the face. Same thing as before. Not too much paint on the brush. We're going to start over his brow. We're going to pull the brush stroke forward across his brow. Get a nice highlight above his left eye. And then we're going to reverse the direction and pull it back. Nice highlight up there. There we go. Now, if you're really keen, you could paint that eyelid which is there, but I wouldn't do it if you don't feel comfortable. Now we're going to paint the side of the nose facing towards the light, and we're going to paint the nostril separately on that side. Put a little dot there for the nostril so the nose shape looks right. And then the top of his cheek under his eye, and being careful not to connect this into the eye socket that we painted earlier. You want to keep them separate. So it looks like he's got little eyelashes. Now, same thing on the cheek. A nice little round cheek. And now, I don't know if you can see this. may not be very visible, but my paint is starting to get kind of chalky. So I'll do his upper lip. Okay, down along the side of his mouth, the chin, a little bit on the jawline. We're keeping this face looking pretty simple, okay? We don't want to make it too complicated. Okay, and then I'm gonna have to thin my paint a little bit. There we go. And we start on this cheek, high up by the back by his eye. And we do just a little bit on the bridge of his nose, on that one nostril, the upper lip, a little bit on the cheek. But it doesn't need a huge amount. We don't want to overdo it. And a lot of his face is going to stay in the shadow. There we go. Okay, so a lot of his face is going to stay quite shadowed. But we got a pretty distinct looking elven face now. Well, we just cannot find the right focal point today. Let's do this. There we go. That's better. Okay. And now it's time to let that dry, and we're going to do the next color on the hair. So the next color on the hair is going to be Palomino Gold, pretty much just straight Palomino Gold. And we are going to do exactly what we did before, but in a smaller area. So that was the halo effect. We're going to look at his head. We're going to ignore the sculpted hair texture. We'll start high up, but don't completely cover over the previous highlight. And we're going to pull downward. Now you don't have to use the same colors I'm using. Another good triad from Reaper for doing blonde hair is the warm browns. One that has golden blonde, amber gold, and tanned leather, I want to say. Something like that. That's a really good triad for doing blonde hair. It's a little bit less straw yellow than this one. So I did the brushstrokes from above pulling down. I'm doing from below pulling up. I'm meeting them in that center point. Realize I forgot to do the last highlight on the ear tips. Doesn't matter, we can do that later. And I'm going to keep working my way around the crown of his head. But again, don't go all the way up. It's got to be just down from where the light would strike or it doesn't look right. That's why people talk about the halo effect. Which is caused by that reflection of light off a shiny surface that is convex. Okay. Now we go back from the bottom to the top, pulling and overlapping those highlights in the middle. There we go. Like I say, this gives you a very kind of straw gold yellow hair color. And then we're going to go to where there's convex shapes. So that would be right down here by his left eye. We want to do the underneath of that curl. Pull upwards, and then we'll pull downwards to give that a bit of a curve and some shape. Okay, right along there. And now there's another one of those under here that's going to catch the light. So we'll start at the bottom and pull upwards. And then start a little bit above that and pull down, because that will catch the light. And then this whole shape, this little page boy cut or whatever that's called, is going to catch that light back to about there. Okay, so we're going to do that same effect on the outside of this curve all along. Okay, and then on the other side, same thing. almost all the way to the back. We don't have to go all the way to the back. Just got to get all the hair. There we go. There's our next highlight on the hair. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to remember that I had intended to paint the inside of that hood in there in a shadow color. I'm going to probably forget, but just remember that when you go to finish your mini later, that needs to have a shadow in there, okay? How are we doing for time? We're about 2 hours in, so we're going to start accelerating just a little bit. So I'm going to grab now my buckskin pale color. I'm going to mix that into the Palomino Gold, about 50-50, and this is the next highlight for the hair. And we're just going to roll right into that, because that's such a small area that we just painted. It'll be dry really quick. And we'll do exactly the same highlights again, and continue to ignore the hair texture. Just connect this like a long stripe of light, like a little halo going all the way around his head. So we did the light from above, and now we do the ones from below. Meet them in the middle. Meet them in the middle where we want the light to be brightest. And we keep going all the way around. And it's going to start to look like he's wearing a very shiny. He's got very shiny hair, like he's been a well-fed puppy. It's probably not an appropriate thing to say about well, it's a non-existent fantasy creature, so I don't think that's the wrong thing to say. There we go. Worked our way all the way around that. Oh, I keep getting right off camera today. Look at that. Okay. Nice, strong highlight all the way around. Now we're going to do the same ones as before. So underneath, try to keep this really small and tight. Now, the smaller these highlights get, the shinier and lighter his hair will appear. So one of the secrets of things like non-metallic metal is things look shiny when the highlights are small and bright and very close to shadows. So there we go. Now we're going to do the outside of these curves in his hair as before. Just not going to go quite as far back as we did before, because now we're back into the shadow area of his head. That's probably going to do the job there. Okay. Not bad, not bad. I can live with it. We need to do this little bit along here as well now. I think this time I'm going to start from the bottom. Just make it easier to control. Tiny little gentle brush strokes. There we go. Now reverse them and come back the other way. Just hitting the outside of that curve in the hair. Okay, that's enough on that. Now we're going to do our second last highlight on the hair. We'll use straight buckskin pale. And we're basically now we're going to pay attention to the texture. So I'm just going to do a little tiny highlight of this on the areas that are most raised in the texture. Still keeping it really small and tight. Smaller the better. Just to bring out those separate strands of hair and make them look shinier. Do the same thing down at the bottom. Remember, you still want to do that thing where we go from opposite directions to create the overlap. Now normally I'll go one step further and do this all the way up to pure white, but I would normally do my blending glaze first before going back to do that final highlight. There we go. We'll do that on the other side as well. It's going to start like he has nice shiny blonde hair. His hair will be so shiny gold, he'll be popular with the Numenorians because they're into shiny things. Nobody hit me with anything. Nobody threw anything at me in the studio. That's good. That's good. All right. It's looking pretty looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. Okay, so then the next thing we want to do, I think let's pump up the highlights on the skin tone. We're getting close to being able to start wrapping some of these details up. We're going to do the skin tone again. So I'm going to use straight rosy skin highlight now. It's quite a light color. And now I'm going to use that. I'm going to do the tips of his ears. One little highlight pulling back right on the tip of his ears. I'm going to repeat that 2 or 3 times to really make it light. There we go. Now I'm going to start on the left side of his face and work my way forward. Want a little dot right by the cheek under his eye, right at the top where the light would kind of pass by and catch the top of his cheek up there. And I want the tip of his nose, the arch of his nose, the top of his brow above that eye, which is an arched eye. We want a daub of this in the middle of his cheek, a little round cheek highlight. Tip of his nose, side of that nostril again, and then just a little bit on his chin. Not much, just a little dot on his chin. Tie it all together. There we go. So now we've got a pretty good looking elven face. Some nice strong, cartoony looking, but strong elven eyes. We got some nice highlights going on. So now let's do the next highlight on his leather while all of that's kind of drying out. So the next highlight on the leather. We are going to grab that leather brown. What was it called? What's this color called? Harvest brown we were using earlier. Harvest brown. We're going to use harvest brown again. But this time, I want you to take just the tiniest dollop of rosy skin highlight and mix some of that in with a little bit of this brown color. And that's going to make it less opaque and slightly lighter. And now, don't overload your brush with this. You don't want too much of this on there at once. But you can think of this as a bit like dry brushing in some ways, but it's not dry brushing. The brush has definitely got wet paint on it. But we're just going to kind of fiddle around and put little dots and dashes and bumps and wiggles all over the front of this bracer. And you see where all I did those little mistakes before are slowly getting covered over by this color. But they still kind of show through a little bit, adding a little bit of color, a little bit of texture, a little bit of variety to this obviously weather-worn and beaten bracer that our elf here has been using to adventure in dungeons and do all those kinds of things. But I'm really focusing my attention towards building up this towards the light. Okay, building it up towards the light. And it's going to look like kind of a beat-up, worn leather bracer. Which, since he's an archer, makes sense. It's the one that's always getting hit by the bowstring. It's the one that he's punching orcs in the face when they charge him, that kind of thing. Okay? There we go. So that's one way to do the leather. Another way to do it would be take that same color again, and you can load your brush up with it. But if you were to make it a little bit thinner, then you could just kind of wiggle your brush along the shapes. So I'll do this on the boot now. Just kind of wiggle your brush along the shapes and leave little irregular lines on the edges and on the raised areas. But you still got to respect that idea of pulling the brush towards the light so we get a broader highlight towards the light. I'll do that on the raised areas all the way down the front of the boot, keeping the brush going in the right direction towards the light. And that'll bring out the shape of the boot, the soft, round leather shapes. And this paint darkens quite a bit as it dries. So it's going to kind of fade into the background a bit and just look like a gentle, softer, lit up highlight on the boot. We'll do that on the other side as well. Just a gentle kind of wiggle of the brush. Get a little bit of this paint to come off, but keeping the brush moving towards the light. There we go. So now we've got kind of two slightly different looking leather textures. So the casual observer might be like, oh, those are two different colors. And we'll have tricked them into thinking we've done more work than we really did. I'm going to do the same thing on the bracer on the shadow side, but I'm really just doing a little bit of this to kind of highlight the edge of it that would be sticking out past his neck to show up. Just a little bit in there so it's visible. And that's probably going to be enough on that. On his belt pouch, I'll do the wiggle approach to get a little bit of a highlight on there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the big belt that goes over his shoulder. So I'm going to start down at the bottom. Now this is not going to respect the light direction, but that's what I can reach. So I'm going to start down at the bottom, and my brush is going to be pulling from the bottom of the belt towards the top. Because if I do it the other way, I'll end up making a mess on the cloak or on the shirt, and I don't want to have to repaint any of that stuff now. Where the belt comes out from under his shoulder, he's got that little brooch in the middle of his jacket. I'm not worried about hitting that. We're not going to paint that today. You can paint that whatever color you like later. Paint it with some sort of metallic gold or silver or whatever you feel like. So I'm just picking out some of the brown leather bits now. So there we go, just to make them a little bit more visible. And on that scabbard, there's like straps around it. So I'm going to highlight those straps separately to make sure that the shape that was sculpted is really visible. I'll take advantage of those details. There we go. Just gentle little brush strokes to bring them out. And I'm just kind of wiggling the brush to get a little bit of this paint to come off on there. And every time I wiggle, I want to keep the brush moving towards the light. There we go. Okay. The belt pouch back there, another little belt. Doesn't have to be perfect, but now we got those details picked out. Okay, and we need to do the same thing on the back where that belt comes underneath, under there. Just a little bit of a highlight under there. Highlight the outside of the belt pouch. The back of the bracer on this side shouldn't really be too light compared to the other side, but we need to do something just to kind of define it. So we'll give it a little bit more of just a little bit of that orange color. And now, for the bit of the quiver, which has really got the light hitting it directly, I'm going to just give it proper, like, heavier brush strokes, but pulling towards the light. So I'll start on this piece of the leather here, right at the top of the quiver. And the brush strokes go forward towards the light. And then I'm going to reverse it and do exactly as we did earlier and connect to the highlights on top of that so the highlights overlap right on the edge of that quiver. It gives it a nice rich brown color. And there's a little bit of a lip between that and the arrows. I'm going to paint that separately, give it its own little highlight. There we go. There's like a arrowy pattern thing on this, so I'm going to highlight that separate. This little bit of texture that they've added. There we go. Because it's meant to be like rangery leaves or something. There we go. We'll highlight that as well separately. There we go. Now that's not enough highlighting for that quiver, so I'm going to add a little bit more of that skin tone in, make another lighter color. And I'm going to highlight all of those little bits on the quiver, just on the quiver, so it looks different color than the rest of it. Oops, there we go. There's our light. That. It's a little bit like highlighting the hair, right? We want the leather to look a little bit rich and shiny by putting this little bit of an extra highlight on there. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the cloak. We're going to finish the cloak in a minute. Same thing on these little bits here. Make them stand out. Okay, but what's really going to make these guys stand out is I'm now going to go to my Palomino Gold, that color I was working with earlier. That was the hair color, and I'm going to take, I think, the chestnut gold one, and I'm just going to do a small bit, like a thin layer of that over this part of the leather to make it look like it's a different color. So the quiver is getting a very, very light layer of Palomino Gold. So it doesn't look like it's exactly the same color as his boots and everything else around it. Now, careful not to connect this directly to those little bits of highlight that we painted on the leather straps and on the little arrows and things. We want to keep those looking distinct, looking sharp. There we go. That looks like it's a totally different leather color from the boots and from the boots and the bracers and all those things. If we wanted to, we could do the same thing with the Palomino Gold in a different area, but I think that's enough variation for right now. And now, as promised, we are going to keep going on the cloak. I need to change brushes. That brush is annoying me. Oh well, I'll use that Da Vinci one again. So, everything else around there is all dry pretty much. Now I'm going to go to the, this is golden blonde with no green in it to speak of. And I'm going to redo all of those highlights on the cloak with this color. Really, really small highlights just to bring them up. And I'm going to do one more highlight on top of that, I think, with the creamy ivory as well. Just give them a real pop. And then we'll glaze over it with the leaf green. Okay, so now I'm really looking for these highlights right up here on the top of the shoulder. There's going to be small, gentle brush strokes going towards the light direction. And exactly as we were doing earlier, I'm going to reverse it and connect the highlights on top of the shoulder, pointing at the light direction. Okay, do that on the hood. Really important not to completely cover any of the previous highlights. We need that green to still be there, otherwise it'll start to just look like yellow or something, and that's not what we want. The one on the other side of his chest, that gets a little bit of a highlight. The bit that sticks out by the corner, just give it a highlight on the edge. Don't highlight any more than that. The one down between his legs, same idea, just a little highlight on the bit closest towards the light. Okay, and then out here we're going to be doing a little bit more. So that little bit that sticks out by his left knee, that gets a little highlight. And that one comes right out to the edge. And if you see like little bits of variation, there's like little cuts and things in the cloak, the side of those bits of damage that faces away from the light gets a little bit of an extra highlight, and it'll start to look like a little bit of weathering. We'll do a little bit along that edge, a little bit along this edge closest to the light as well. There we go. Now we need to hit these areas in the back here. So this one is going to be the brightest right out here. But again, these highlights need to be smaller than the ones we painted earlier. Same thing in there. And we'll do this one. Just a little bit of a highlight there. Okay, and then we want to do an edge highlight on that edge of the cloak right there. Not everywhere, just on the edge that faces directly towards the light. Okay, just to kind of bring that up. I think that spot on his hood needs just a little bit more right there. Okay, that's going to be enough. But remember what I said, we're going to go one level lighter using the creamy ivory. So I'm going to clean my brush out. I need a nice small brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the creamy ivory ready to go. It's been sitting on the palette for a while drying out, so I'm going to mix it up a bit. I'm going to put a little bit of my retardant in it that I put in there earlier, the Flow Aid. Liquitex Flow Aid is what I'm using, which is it's a surfactant, right? So it reduces the surface tension, but it also slows down the drying time just a bit. Just a little bit of that in there. And this is going to go in a bunch of places. So the first place I'm going to do this is right on the tip of his nose, a little bit on the top of his cheek, top of both cheeks, and on the top of his head. That just is going to give us a little bit more highlight on his face. I'm also going to do this on the halo around his head, just a little bit on the most raised areas of that texture. So right now you're thinking, he said he was working on the cloak, why is he doing this? So what I'm doing is tying together the lighting across the Mini. He's lit by the same light source on every color, so every color is getting the same highest highlight, which is this creamy ivory. I'll do the same thing on the other side of his head, just a little line of it. And if you're wondering what, like, because it's hard to see the details quite often on the camera, we'll post, there'll be photos of these posted on my Facebook page, but also I will take a couple of photos and show them at the end of the video when we post it, so you can see really closely what the final look was. Okay, so just a little bit like that to bring it up. And if you wanted to, you could go one step further, do all that same stuff with pure white that I'm doing right now, to take it one step further. But now I'm going to do it on the cloak. Very small highlights right at the top. Tiny little highlights right at the top. Just to bring this up to the same color as on his face. Do a little bit on that side, not too much. Oh, I'm grabbing the wrong color. I just grabbed the yellow by mistake. I meant to grab the white. Let's clean that brush off and try again. I was wondering why it didn't look like it was a different color. Okay, so we'll do those highlights on the cloak again. That's more like it. Do a little bit on the edge of this down here. This edge. Those shapes. Doesn't need much. This is just like a kind of a final raising of the values, making it lighter, where the light would be most obvious. Okay, that's about what I want. Now you can do that on the boot, you do it on the pants, you do it everywhere, but I haven't really brought the highlights up on those far enough yet. But in the interest of time, that's as much as I'm going to do. And now what I will do is I'm going to glaze green over the cloak. Okay, so I'm just going to give that a second to dry. While it's drying, I'm going to putter around a bit. I'll mix some, I'll grab some snow shadow, maybe do a little bit more highlighting on the jacket. We just got to give that a moment to dry. If I was to glaze right now, the water will reactivate everything I just did and might cause it to lift off the Mini. So we're going to give that a moment or two to dry. I'm just going to putter around with a few little highlights with snow shadow on the jacket. These would be like my highest highlights on the jacket to make it stand out. Not on the shirt, on the jacket. Just puttering. Do another few moments to dry. While I'm doing this, does anybody have any questions or anything else they wanted to ask? You got any questions back there, Roger?
Nope.
There we go. Starting to look pretty good. Putting some lighter, almost pure white highlights on the shirt and the pants. Just to kind of bring up the values on those highlights, but not putting a lot of effort into it because I'm just really just waiting for that green to have a moment to dry. There we go. Okay, that's where we're at. Not too bad. And I think that's dry enough. Now we can do the green. So the green is pretty light. What I'm going to do, I think I'm going to use my new fancy beat up old brush here. Used it for like half an hour today and already wrecked it. I'm going to use that to do my glazing. So lots of volume in there, lots of paint to play with. I'm going to glaze with the darker green, with this leaf green. So what I'm going to do is I get a bit of it off the side on my palette. I'm going to add quite a bit of water in that. It's going to be probably 5 times as much water as paint. But you really got to play this by ear and do it yourself, okay, to figure out how thick it should be. Now, I could glaze this with blue, I could glaze it with yellow, I could glaze it with ink, all kinds of ways to glaze it. But what I'm really looking for this, the reason I'm doing it like this right now is I just want to glaze to blend. So the paint I'm going to use, I'm going to do a test on my thumbnail, see how thick it is. Okay, it just barely shows up when I put it on my thumb. But what you're going to see happen is, as you watch, it's going to dry and it's going to darken. Okay, it dries and darkens. And it will show up on the Mini, even though it's going to look almost invisible initially. Okay, so it is going to show up. The reason we do it so thin, as most of you have watched the videos before, you'll know that if you do too much at the start, it's hard to get it back off. So we do a little at a time. 1 or 2 glazes will get us a better result. 1 or 2 thin glazes or more is better than 1 thick glaze. Now what each of these layers is going to do is make all of the green on the Mini, on the cloak, closer to the base coat color that we use, which is down here. That's the base coat color. So if I do just put a dab of that on, it might show up, right? There it is. And as it dries, it's going to darken. And as it darkens, it's going to disappear into the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to pull this color down across everything, and it's going to darken everything. But when it dries, I want the daubs of paint that we were doing before, like these daubs of paint, right? I want them to end up in the shadow. So whenever I do this, I'm pushing that to the bottom of the Mini, or even right off of the Mini. Okay? So Aaron Lovejoy from Miniature Monthly, our awesome host, calls having an exit strategy, a place to push the paint, the glaze, that droplet of paint off the edge of the Mini to make your blending glaze smoother. So I'm going to start up here, and I'm going to work the brush slowly along that so that it has time to flow off. And I'm going to pull the paint down across all these shapes. I'm going to only go that far. Okay, only going that far so that I have a space that I can work with before it dries, and I'm pulling it right off the bottom gently so that whatever excess paint I have is going to end up on top of this area of green, which is already the same color as the paint I'm using. It's already the same color, so the glaze is going to be invisible when it dries. And because it's basically making everything similar tint, it's bringing everything closer to being the same green, the blends are going to look smoother. I'm going to let that dry so you can see the difference between the blending in that area and over here where we haven't blended yet. And it's going to look quite a bit different. Okay, you'll still be able to see the highlights. The highlights will still show up. They're not as strong, okay, but they're still noticeable through that glaze. I just accidentally put the flow aid into my glaze. So I'm going to make a new glaze. The flow aid changes the way that the paint dries and changes the way that the paint moves from surface tension. And I don't want to add another factor into what I'm doing. So I'm going to start again, make a new little glaze. And by that point, this will be dry. You see the difference now. See what it did to my thumb? Okay, there's the green on my thumb. And that's what it did to the cloak. Really smoothed out all those areas. So the next area I'm going to hit is right there. I'll do the same thing again. Pull the brush slowly across. Why do I go slowly? To give time for the paint to flow off the brush into the low areas. But also I'm simultaneously wiping it off the raised areas, so you can really see it happening there. There's that little blob of paint that I don't want. I'm going to pull that right off the edge. Right on. I'm glad you're enjoying that, Geese. Let's keep going. Do that right along the top. So a lot of people doing this kind of layering will do 10, 15, 20 layers of glaze and take a long time to build the color up. And the color will be very rich and the blending will be very smooth, but it takes a long time. What I prefer to do is build up very, very bright highlights and then smooth them together a little bit with the glaze. And if it's smooth enough, I keep it. If it's not smooth enough, I can repeat. And quite often, I get nice, rich colors. It won't be as rich as if you do like 50 layers of glaze, but you're gonna build up your color and your values much, much faster. And you just have to choose the right foundation colors. I'm doing the same thing on this hood now. I'm basically maneuvering those little green dots off of the raised areas into the shadow. Like that. There we go. And I'm going to keep working before it dries and do the other side now as well. Because I don't want to end up with a coffee stain on the top of the shoulder. That would be really obvious. There we go. Keep working it along. There we go. We're going to slowly work my way back off the shoulder into the shadow back here. There we go. And the same thing. I'm going to do this in there. I'll start out at the bright area and push the paint back towards the shadow where it's going to land on the same color. Kitty. So on that side, I'm going to reverse it, and I'm going to put it up close to his belt line or crotch area there, and then pull it down towards the bottom of the cloak and push that excess paint off into the shadow. And the last place we got to do that is right here. So I'm going to start close to the front and I'm pushing the paint back towards the shadow, pushing it off the highlight, off this next highlight, and then I'm kind of parking it along the edge of the leg in the shadow. There we go. I'm pulling the excess right off the edge of the cloak. There we go. And now we're going to have a lovely, smoothly blended looking cloak. Okay, so you can do that on skin tone, you can do that on the hair, we can do that on the leather, we can do that everywhere. It works really well. All right, I am going to stop there. It's we're at about 2.5 hours of painting, and I think that gives everybody kind of enough that you can finish the details yourselves. We could do a gold brute, some silver metallics, and a few little spots on the accoutrements. The one thing I haven't done is much in the way of dark lining. So I'll do just a little bit of dark line to remind everybody kind of how it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that black paint that I put on there earlier. This is Dragon Black. Grab a little bit of the Twilight Blue. I'm going to mix them together, make a really dark gray blue color. And it's kind of thin. You could mix a wash into this. You could mix a little bit of black ink into it, whatever you like. The key thing is going to be a brush with a really good point on it. Don't overload the brush. You don't need a lot of paint. Okay, so there's not much paint on there. And I'm making lines like that in all the shadows. So like where my thumb cuticle meets the thumb. If I wanted to put a black line in there, I would run that along like that. Okay, putting the tip into the V, kind of pushing it along the edge. And I create a black line around every shape on the Mini. Where my thumbnail is on the top, I put that brush underneath. Okay, to exaggerate the shadows. The natural shadows get exaggerated by putting that black shadow in there. And that's going to help accentuate all different shapes. So a really good place for this on this particular Mini is going to be the leather. So like this, all this leather in on the main part of his body doesn't look very separate. But if I was to do a line, let's say, between the hilt and the scabbard, and in the different shapes of the hilt, okay, and I'll do it below that. And there's all these patterns on the scabbard as well. I'll outline each one of those with a black line. And they suddenly become distinct shapes. Much easier to see. And after dark lining, you might find that you want, oops, hit the bowstring. You might discover that you want to make the highlights lighter. And that's one of the things that this is going to do for you, is reveal what's light enough and what's not light enough. There's a belt buckle in there now. Becomes a little bit more visible. We do this between the belt and the cloak, over his shoulder. Anywhere that two surfaces meet, you're painting in a shadow line. Okay, anywhere that two surfaces meet, and not just anywhere, everywhere that two surfaces meet, get this line. And that really is going to make a big difference to making the shapes look defined. The earlier in your painting life that you start doing this and force yourself to get good at it, the better off you'll be. You're going to develop brush control skills. Your Minis are going to look better. People are going to tell you that your Minis look awesome. You're going to feel more confident. You'll start to be braver in the way you paint. And hey, the next thing you know, you're having a show and you're having people judge your Minis at a big contest like Monte Sansovino or something, and you'll have earned it the hard way. Not the hard way. You'll have earned the skills by practice, and it'll pay off long term. Everywhere that two surfaces meet, so under the green edge of that cloak, everywhere. And it will make a huge difference to the final look of your figure. Okay, look at that. You can really pick those shapes out much better now. Worth the effort. When you go to paint that bowstring, what I tend to do is paint the bowstring the same color as the bow, but then give it one additional highlight of pure white to kind of make it look like it's a little bit reflective. Small things tend to look lighter than large things. It's just a funny thing. So that string, because it's so thin, is going to look lighter than the bow. So just give it one long white highlight. Not the whole length of it, most of the length of it. And maybe one little extra bright spot. Look at that dark lining, what that did to that quiver. Okay, really, really brings it out. So on that bowstring, I would do something like paint it the wood color, like the brown or whatever. We'll use this brown color just for speed. Something like that. Okay. Give it that brown color. Paint the string the same brown color. Okay, so now they look like they're the same bow. And when you go to highlight, so you'll use our favorite golden blonde there. I'll put a highlight on the bow with golden blonde, like that. Give it a nice wood color, pale wood color, okay? That. Highlight the bowstring with the same color. Yes, highlight the bowstring. Leave the shadow side of the bowstring dark. Highlight the light side of the bowstring. Like that. I know most of you probably don't have a bowstring on there, so I'll do this really quick. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go, and I want to make the bowstring lighter than the bow. So I'm going to grab pure white. This is probably going to be too light, but you're going to get the idea. So my light is coming this way. So somewhere out here, there's going to be a lighter spot in the bowstring. So I come from one side, come from the opposite side, overlap them in the middle to make a highlight. Okay? And I'll do the same thing out here somewhere. Come from the right to the left, come from the left to the right, overlap them in the middle, and get a nice highlight out there. And now my bowstring is highly visible, especially if you're doing tabletop. That will show up on the tabletop for your D&D game like you wouldn't believe. Super, super visible. Okay? But it looks appropriate. It looks natural. Always do a bowstring if you can. All right, so there we are. That is 2.5 hours of painting. If you made it this far, congrats. You're a champ. Hopefully I didn't paint too fast. I tried to go slow and take some breaks. And I think what I'll do is tomorrow I'm going to come in, I'll put another hour into it, finish the little details. Then we'll take the photos and do a little like a 360 view of it. And we'll get it posted. We'll get the video posted up. The videos, we get the videos done within about 4 or 5 days. But the YouTube doesn't make them accessible for another half a week or so after they get uploaded. So probably middle of not this coming week, but the next week it'll be up there. So 6 to 8 days probably the video will be available. The one from last week, with luck, will be the one from 2 weeks ago, with luck, will be accessible tomorrow. The one from last week will be accessible around the 6th or 7th of December, with luck. There we are. So, last chance to ask some questions, and I'm going to move out. Okay, so the final look at the miniature from last week, Lanaeral, the ranger with his bow. I just did some final touch-up on him, a little bit of weathering, a bit of brown on his bottom of his cloak, give him some little tufts and things on the bottom. Just tied it up, put some stripes on his pants, and there we go. I didn't do anything to this guy that we hadn't already kind of discussed in the video, or on the paint-along, sorry. And there he is, all finished up. Nice light colored hair. Little brooch. His leather is all tidied up. And there he is, sussing out that orc on the horizon that he's gonna ping with an arrow. And the bowstrings really just level up the mini. So you'd always try to put a bowstring on if you can. And once you do it a few times, it gets easier. The first few will be a real pain, but then once you've got a technique, always worth doing it. So there he is, Lanaeral the elf, all finished up.